Dynasty Owner. Today we're going to be talking about another video breakdown. Hopefully you enjoy it. We're going to be talking about the Eagles today. So let's jump right into it. First thing, I just want to give some background. So we're only 24 days away from regular season games. Pretty remarkable how fast this offseason has gone by. As we go through this article, this will be the second to last for my series that we've been doing, the contract breakdown. So we have this one, and then next week we're going to conclude with the Washington football team, and that'll be it. And I'll probably do a couple week wrap up, trying to wrap up some of the biggest things that we learned over this whole offseason. But other than that, it's going to be the breakdowns, the end of the breakdowns, then we're going to be into the regular season football. So very exciting times. Today, like I said, we're going to go over some of the Eagles stuff. So let's talk about some of the free agents that the Eagles had. So they had 4 notable free agents that I plan on talking about today. It's kind of subjective, notable can mean a lot of different things. It's kind of how I determine it. So the way I do it is just they have to be rosterable in Dynasty Owner, and that's it's kind of my own term. But in our format, I'm not going to include every single player that the Eagles had that's a free agent, coming into this season. So I determined there were 4 from we need to talk about, and they are Richard Rodgers, Boston Scott, Greg Ward, and Corey Clement. So, and actually some of these maybe not even needed to be included, but we're going to talk about them anyway. So let's start with Rodgers. Richard was unrestricted coming into the 2021 offseason. The Eagles elected to bring him back, so they're going to give him 1 year, a little over $1 million. It's like right at $1.03 million. And the hard truth is that he's probably not going to make much of a fantasy impact. He only had 70.5 fantasy points whole season last year. Not terrible for a tight end, but when we have Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert in the mix, they're going to be catching the majority of the passes, mainly Goddard, but there's not really a clear path to meaningful touches for Rodgers. So obviously there could be an injury to the other 2 tight ends, makes them a little more interesting, but I'm not going to, I don't plan on injuries. I don't project those into my rankings. So he's a deep stash if you even want to hold on to him. He's pretty cheap, so not really much risk to hold him. Next, we have Boston Scott. So he's a player that I love to watch. He's really fiery when he plays. So he only had 80 rushing attempts and 25 receptions last season. But with that, he managed to get 111.5 fantasy points. So pretty efficient for the low volume that he gets. And also, he's a very cheap option. His salary was cheap. Coming into this season, he was an exclusive rights free agent. So that means he didn't really have much leverage. I kind of talk about a little bit more in my article, but if the Eagles offered him a tender, which they did, he really has no leverage to do anything else. He can't talk to any other teams or anything. His hands were kind of tied with his options, but he did end up signing that tender. It's 1 year, $290,000. So he'll be playing for the Eagles again. Obviously, complicating matters is the fact that we still have Miles Sanders, and then Kerryon Johnson was actually signed by the Eagles as well. So I think Scott will come into the season as the running back too. It's my opinion that Kerryon Johnson is a little bit more talented, so we'll see how that shakes up throughout the season. But I wouldn't be surprised if Scott becomes a running back 3 by the end of the season. Another player who was an earned rights free agent, exclusive rights free agent, that's Greg Ward. So he returns to the Eagles on another cheap contract. Same thing as Scott. His hands were tied. Didn't really have anything that he could do other than sign this tag or retire. So not great news for Ward, obviously. I mean, he's on a minimum contract. He's going to be making, 1 year, $850,000. But good news for Dynasty owners because they're going to have a player on a cheap contract. He could even be a starting wide receiver. We don't know how that's going to work out. With Rager and Devonta Smith and possibly Ward as the wide receiver 3. So he's a hold, cheap contract, really no risk to hold on to him. And finally, we have Corey Clement. He's one of the players that I kind of debated on whether I wanted to include. He's not going to have much fantasy impact. He didn't last year. I think last year he only had a little over 20 fantasy points. So he joins the New York Giants. He gives valuable running back depth. I mean, anytime you can get an average running back on a team, it's going to provide you with valuable depth, especially at a tough position to come by. But we know that Saquon, even if he's not back for the start of the regular season, he's going to be the workhorse for the season. And then they also added Devontae Booker in the offseason. So I think Booker is clearly going to be the running back 2. That means Clement is going to be the 3rd running back on that team. I don't really see, the same way with Rodgers, I don't really see a pathway to meaningful touches or carries. So his contract is 1 year, $90,000. So cheap enough you can own him, but I don't really see the need. He's probably not going to provide you any fantasy impact throughout the season. So we got that out of the way. All the free agents, or post-free agents, I should say. Let's do one character breakdown, contract breakdown, and that is Jalen Reagor. So he's one of the most undervalued players coming into the 2021 season. He's all but been forgotten. And it's a kind of a two-part thing. Mainly, Devonta Smith coming in. He's the shiny new toy. More talented. I think everyone would pretty much agree with that he's the more talented player. Draft capital was a little bit more for Smith. But also even before that is the fact that Reagor missed 6. He didn't miss 6 games. He just didn't have a catch in 6 games in 2020 season, mainly due to an injury. He injured his right thumb earlier on the season. He had to have surgery. So that kind of left a bad taste in people's mouths. I think the fact that he did it earlier on in the season isn't as detrimental as it would have been if it would have happened at the end of the season. Just kind of the way the philosophy and the psychology of that works with fantasy. Like, you have a player that starts the season hot and ends cold. You're kind of down on him more than you would be if he started cold and then ended hot. So Reagor comes into the 2021 season. He's got 3 years remaining on his rookie contract. Still a cheap contract, $3.3 million. And then let me show you how he compares to some of his other valued receivers. So take a look at this, and we can see that these are all pretty similar players. They're all of them except for one, that's Hollywood Brown, is either a rookie or was a rookie last year. And then I actually even included Devonta Smith on there just to give a team kind of look at these two players and what their value is projected to be in 2021. So who would you own from all of these players? We got Marquise Brown, Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Reagor, Kadarius Toney, and Devonta Smith. Who would you rather own in Dynasty Owner? And I go down in this in my article a little bit more, but my pick would be Jerry Jeudy. I think he's going to be the more valuable player. He's going to get the most fantasy points probably on the season unless Smith really takes off. And, he's still got 3 years left on his contract. So the way I ranked them was Jeudy, Devonta Smith, Jalen Reagor, Marquise Brown, and Kadarius Toney. Devonta Smith over Reagor, obviously, I like him more in Dynasty Owner, but that's not to say that Reagor should be completely forgotten, because he's still being drafted, obviously, but and I'm going to go over this in a second, his ADP is just way down from where it should be, at least from where he was being drafted last year. Last season really took a toll, and then adding Devonta Smith really didn't help either. So that's the main thing I want to talk about is the ADP. So the biggest discrepancy between these two players is where they're being drafted. Devonta Smith's ADP at this moment, at the time of this writing, is 57.2. So he's being drafted regularly in the 4th round. Jalen Reagor is being drafted at 147.9. So that's right in the middle of the 12th round. Like I said, while I like Smith more, he's got an extra year. His salary's a little more expensive. That's kind of negligible. He's got an extra year. I just don't see the difference, the 8-round difference between these two players, especially when Reagor's had, obviously an extra year to get comfortable with the offense. Smith is probably a little more talented, but I'm just not seeing that big of a difference. Smith is probably being drafted right where he needs to be. Reagor needs to be bumped up quite a bit. I mean, he's being taken in the 12th round on average. I would be very comfortable taking him 7th or 8th, especially if you get a bunch of good running backs to start and pile, players like Reagor on top of them. It's just going to be good value for you to get at that spot. So, yeah, if you can get him in the 12th round, that's great, But I wouldn't be waiting that long if he's still there. 10th round is probably about where I would snag him up if he's still there. Maybe even 8th or 9th, depending on how the draft goes. One other is that Reagor is actually younger than Devonta Smith. So it's kind of a little stat. It's just a few months, not really that big. And, they're only 1 year apart, so that's pretty common to see players like that. But, people might think, well, Rager's a little bit older, he's been there a year longer. And that's true for his contract, contract-wise. He's going to expire his contract faster and get him more experience. He's actually a younger player than Devonta Smith. So just an interesting fact to talk about there. That's really all I wanted to say today. We wrapped up the Eagles. Next week, like I said, we're going to talk about the Washington, and then I'll do either a one or kind of recap for everything that we talked about this entire year. Some of the more important things we talked about. That's going to be it. We'll get into regular season football, and I'll have more articles for you, during the regular season, talking about probably some contract stuff weekly, as the games are played. So I appreciate everybody tuning in, and as always, take care and be